stood by and spoke for the Lawrence family for many of the years of the ordeal that they have been through. Let's get more reaction now from Superintendent Leroy Logan of the Black Police Association. We were just talking about the fact that the jury, Superintendent, was shown a video showing bad character evidence of the racism behind this attack. And your reaction to the verdicts that we've heard today?
Well, I think justice seemed to be done, at least partly, and we just want to acknowledge the determination and tenacity of Doreen and Neville Lawrence for 18 years of trying to get justice and get to this point. And obviously there's been a real personal and human cost for them and their wider family. And, you know, we'd like to say that they've done so much, not just for justice system, but also for wider society in terms of race and equality.
Do you think what Doreen and Neville Lawrence has done has changed the lives or the prospects of other 18-year-old black kids out there today?
Well, I think, you know, there's a lot of things that can help young people, regardless of the culture and background, but I'd like them to feel reassured that they get a better service. I think the Met Police has improved in terms of critical incidents training. The Black Police Association was heavily involved in that training right across the country, police service length and breadth of the UK, and that means that when it comes to scene preservation and forensic evidence and interviewing witnesses, we're extremely more effective. But I think it's also a wake-up call that a lot of our service delivery has to be looked at in terms of stop and search and Section 60s, demarcation of where we believe violence may occur, and someone of my level as superintendent needs to have a real objectivity on how those authorities are being used and how people are being stopped under those circumstances. The DNA database, where up to 80% are taken up by black and minority ethnic individuals. When
you mentioned stop and search, one of my guests a little earlier said it's just as bad today, if not worse than it was then.
Well, the disproportionalities are still worrying. You're 8 times more likely to be stopped if you're black than if you're white. And we in the Black Police Association, as a result of the Lawrence inquiry, developed a leadership program that's been running for 10 years, since 2001. And I do the trust and confidence element in that 100-hour program. And I am very surprised how each year the young people are just of resentment, shows a lot of resentment and tension with police in the way they're being handled on a day-to-day basis. And quite recently in the August disorders, that was seen to be a contributory factor. I mean, we don't condone violence, we don't condone any sort of disorder, but we need to recognise that there's certain contributory factors that causes resentment, and we want to make sure that we build those partnerships. We want to reconnect, and I think education is the key. But more importantly, we have to show the right sort of leadership. You know, a lot of the processes and practices that leads to institutional racism has to be process-driven and not personality-driven. If you don't have the right sort of leadership, things slip. And that's what we've seen over the years. And not just in the police service, but also in the government. The Home Secretary used to chair the Stephen Lawrence steering group. And that used to be the governmental drive to keep force chief constables, you know, under scrutiny, and what gets measured gets done. And those performance indicators around race and equality in terms of service delivery and in culture of the organisation.
Talking about leadership, what would you say right now about Jack Straw, who we're about to interview, who called for the Macpherson inquiry and pushed that?
Well, I think he showed real leadership in responding to the call of action that Devon and Doreen and Neville asked him to do, and he had that inquiry and he chaired that steering group, and that was significant in improving race and equality and service delivery of the police service. Unfortunately, that steering group was dissolved by his successors. Now, I really believe this is a wake-up call, because a lot of the issues we're addressing now in 2012 was very similar to 1993, and we've got to make sure we keep the pressure on and make sure we as a wider society really look at how we work with each other and accept each other.
Superintendent Leroy Logan, thank you very much. I'm going to pick up the point you've made right now. I believe we have the former Home Secretary Jack Straw on the line. And sir, I don't know if you were able to hear Superintendent Leroy Logan there of the Black Police Officers Association saying he felt your successors had dropped the ball somewhat when it came to pushing through the issue of racial justice in the policing system. What do you say to that?
Well, insofar as I heard the question, apologies I didn't hear all of it, was that I think there's no doubt, and I'm grateful to whoever it was who just interviewed you interviewed for what he said about my role in establishing the inquiry, that the fact of the Macpherson inquiry and its implementation has changed the face of policing and relations between black and Asian people and the police in the United Kingdom, for good and for the better. Now, I don't suggest for a moment that if you are a black and Asian, particularly young man, you get the same deal, as it were, in your treatment from the police as you do if you're an equivalent white young man. So we've still got a long way to go. But things have improved dramatically, and that's down to the extraordinary courage and determination which Neville and Doreen Lawrence showed in keeping alive the case for justice for their murdered son Stephen, and for, well, getting on for 19 years. They couldn't get anybody convicted for the murder, but what they were able to do was to make the case to me when I was in the shadows, the Shadow Home Secretary in 94, 95, about the case for an inquiry. I then established that very quickly after I became Home Secretary, got established at the end of July 97, reported in February 1999. And one of the things that Lawrence's parents were determined about, and so was I, that this report shouldn't just be received with lots of hooray for it, but should be implemented. And so there was, as your previous interviewee said, a working party established, which I chaired and my successor David Blunkett chaired, which ensured that the recommendations were implemented. And indeed, the change to the double jeopardy rule, which allowed these two gentlemen who've now been convicted of the murder to be tried a second time, was a direct result of one of the recommendations of the Lawrence inquiry.
At the time of the Macpherson inquiry, when it reported and there was that charge of institutional racism, how did it strike you that the outside world would view Britain and its policing system?
Well, one of the reasons I set it up was because, and bear in mind, now it's a very straightforward thing to have done, to set up this inquiry, because there'd been a failure in the police investigation, but it wasn't straightforward at all, and it took a lot of effort. I may say, since the press is quite often criticised at the moment, one of the things that made my life easier was the fact that the Daily Mail had been running their own campaign for there to be an inquiry, which they had begun when we were still in opposition. And that created a greater space for me to persuade my colleagues in government, and then to ensure some acquiescence by the Metropolitan Police that there should be an inquiry. But I had an instinct. I was sort of uncomfortable about the relationship between the police and the black and Asian community. It plainly wasn't right. I mean, our London home happens to be in Lambeth, and we were there when the Brixton riots took place in the 1980s. It wasn't right, and far too few police officers were black or Asian. They had a difficult time. So the police service was not reflecting the community it served. So when I saw that recommendation, which obviously I did 2 or 3 days before the inquiry that was formally published by me, I thought that it chimed a chord, and it was going to be tough on the police. But the great thing about the British police is that they don't necessarily like what they are invited to do, but they are a disciplined service. And they could see the case that was made, they could see the determination across the political spectrum that the inquiry should be implemented, and so they got on with it. And there's been a lot of progress made since.
Jack Straw, I should just say that we are waiting. It's probably been less than a minute from the point at which Stephen Lawrence's parents will come out of the Old Bailey